Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Jack Porter had always believed that success was built on three pillars: hard work, integrity, and trust. At 35, he had transformed a small construction company into Porter Industries, one of Colorado's most respected commercial development firms. His office walls displayed awards for community service, sustainable building practices, and business ethics, testament to a man who had never compromised his values for profit. The fourth-floor corner office offered a panoramic view of downtown Denver, but Jack rarely admired it anymore. These days, he found himself staring at the framed photo on his desk instead. His wedding day, 5 years ago, Andrea's radiant smile beside his own hopeful expression. Back then, he'd thought he'd found his perfect match, an ambitious marketing executive who shared his drive and seemed to complement his grounded nature with her vibrant energy. Jack's assistant, Melanie Sellers, knocked on his door. "The Morrison Project contracts are ready for your review, and your wife called. She's making dinner reservations for tonight at Romano's." "Thanks, Mel." Jack glanced at his watch. 6:30 p.m., another late night, but Andrea had been understanding about his work schedule lately. Too understanding, perhaps. A year ago, she would have complained about the long hours, demanded more attention. Now she seemed almost relieved when he stayed late. Growing up in rural Montana, Jack had learned early that actions spoke louder than words. His father, Warren Porter, had owned a small ranch and taught Jack that a man's character was measured by how he treated people when no one was watching. His mother, Rita Porter, had shown him that love meant sacrifice and putting family first. These lessons had shaped Jack into someone who gave second chances, who believed in redemption, qualities that had served him well in business but might prove to be his weakness in marriage. Jack's best friend since college, Darren Wise, often joked that Jack was too trusting for his own good. Darren, a criminal defense attorney with a cynical view of human nature, had built his career on the premise that everyone had secrets. "You see the best in people, Jack," he'd say. "Sometimes that blinds you to what's really there." As Jack packed his briefcase, he reflected on Andrea's recent changes. She joined a new yoga studio, started going out with work friends he'd never met, and had become obsessed with her phone, guarding it like state secrets. When he'd suggested they start trying for children last month, she deflected, claiming she wanted to focus on her career first. The drive home to their Highlands Ranch house took 40 minutes, giving Jack time to think. Andrea had inherited the house from her grandmother 2 years into their marriage, a stroke of luck that had allowed them to live well above their means. The sprawling colonial sat on 3 acres, complete with a guest house that Andrea used as her home office. Jack pulled into the circular driveway, noting Andrea's BMW was already there, along with an unfamiliar silver Tesla. She must have brought a client home again, something that had become increasingly common over the past 6 months. Inside, the house felt cold despite the warm October evening. Jack called out, but received no answer. He found a note on the kitchen counter. Had to run out for wine. Back soon. Ugh. The note troubled him. Andrea's handwriting looked rushed, almost nervous. And since when did she sign notes to her husband with just an initial? He walked to the window, overlooking the backyard, and froze. The guest house lights were on, and he could see 2 silhouettes moving inside. Jack's instincts, honed by years of managing construction crews and reading people, told him something was fundamentally wrong. But his heart, the part of him that had loved Andrea since their first date, refused to accept what his mind was beginning to suspect. He decided to wait, to give Andrea the benefit of the doubt one more time. After all, trust was the foundation of marriage, wasn't it? Chapter 2. The Other Woman's Game. Andrea Caldwell Porter had always been a master of reinvention. Born in Chicago to middle-class parents who valued appearances over authenticity, she'd learned early that image mattered more than substance. Her mother, Mona Caldwell, had been a real estate agent who specialized in showing perfect homes to perfect families while hiding her own husband's drinking problem. From her, Andrea learned that everyone had a public face and a private truth. At 28, Andrea possessed the kind of polished beauty that opened doors. Auburn hair, green eyes, and a smile that could convince anyone she was genuinely interested in their conversation. She'd built her marketing career on reading people's desires and selling them dreams, a skill that had served her well in both professional and personal relationships. The affair with Travis Jennings had started innocently enough. Travis, the owner of Jennings Development, was Jack's biggest competitor and had been trying to poach Porter Industries clients for years. When Andrea met him at a Chamber of Commerce mixer 8 months ago, she'd initially seen him as just another networking opportunity. But Travis was different from Jack in ways that both attracted and repelled her. Where Jack was steady and principled, Travis was volatile and ambitious. Where Jack built lasting relationships, Travis burned through people like disposable resources. At 32, Travis had already been married twice and had a reputation for mixing business with pleasure in ways that would make ethics lawyers nervous. Jack's too good for this world, Travis had said during one of their early meetings at the downtown Marriott. He actually believes people will do the right thing just because it's right. That kind of thinking will get you eaten alive in this business. Andrea found herself drawn to Travis's cynicism. After 5 years with Jack, his unwavering optimism and moral certainty had begun to feel suffocating. Jack saw the world in terms of right and wrong, but Andrea had learned that life was mostly lived in the gray areas between. The physical affair began 3 months ago, but the emotional betrayal had started much earlier. Andrea began sharing Jack's business strategies with Travis, telling herself it was just harmless pillow talk. When Travis used that information to undercut Porter Industries on the Morrison project, costing Jack nearly $2 million, Andrea felt a thrill of power she'd never experienced in her marriage. "You're wasted on him," Travis would whisper during their meetings at the guest house. "You could be running your own empire instead of playing supportive wife to Boy Scout Jack." Travis had a vision that excited Andrea. A joint venture where Jennings Development would handle construction while she ran a complementary marketing and property management firm. All they needed was capital and Jack's client list. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Divorce Jack, take half his assets including the house, and use her insider knowledge of his business to steal his biggest clients. There was just one complication that Andrea hadn't anticipated. She was pregnant. The pregnancy test had shown positive 3 weeks ago, and while she was certain the baby was Travis's, she couldn't prove it without a paternity test. More importantly, she couldn't risk Travis knowing about the pregnancy until she'd secured her financial future. Men like Travis didn't stick around for diapers and midnight feedings. Andrea's plan required precise timing. She'd file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, claim the baby was Jack's to secure higher alimony payments, and once the settlement was finalized, she'd reveal the truth. By then, she'd have enough money and business connections to start fresh with or without Travis. What Andrea didn't know was that Jack's late nights at the office weren't always about work. For the past month, he'd been meeting with Kevin Steele, a private investigator Darren Wise had recommended. Jack's suspicions had finally overcome his trust, and Kevin's surveillance had documented everything. The hotel meetings, the guest house encounters, even recorded conversations where Andrea discussed strategy with Travis. As Andrea prepared dinner that October evening, she practiced her speech in the mirror. She would tell Jack about the pregnancy first. Let him have a moment of joy before crushing him with the rest. The divorce papers, prepared by her attorney Willard Orr, were already in her briefcase. Everything was ready. She had no idea that Jack was preparing for this conversation too, or that his preparation would determine not just the outcome of their marriage, but the trajectory of her entire future. The stage was set for a battle between two very different kinds of intelligence: Andrea's manipulative cunning and Jack's methodical justice. Chapter 3. The Dinner Revelation. Romano's restaurant buzzed with the typical Thursday evening crowd, but Jack barely noticed the familiar ambience of exposed brick walls and dim lighting. He sat across from Andrea at their usual corner table, the one they'd requested for 5 years of anniversary dinners, birthday celebrations, and quiet date nights. Tonight felt different, charged with an undercurrent of tension that made even casual conversation feel forced. Andrea looked stunning as always, wearing the emerald dress he'd bought her for Christmas. Her makeup was flawless, her smile bright, but Jack's newly awakened instincts caught the subtle tells. The way she checked her phone every few minutes, how her laugh sounded just slightly off-key, the nervous habit of twisting her wedding ring that she'd developed over the past few months. "You seem distracted tonight," Jack said, cutting into his ribeye. "Everything okay at work?" "Actually, that's what I want to talk to you about." Andrea's voice carried a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I've been thinking about our future, Jack, about what we both want from life." Jack nodded, his expression neutral despite the briefcase sitting beside his chair. Inside was Kevin Steele's complete dossier. Photos, audio recordings, financial records, and a timeline that painted a devastating picture of betrayal. But he needed to hear it from Andrea first, needed to understand exactly who he'd been married to all these years. "I've been thinking about that too," he said carefully. "What conclusions have you reached?" Andrea took a sip of wine, gathering courage. "I think we've grown apart, Jack. We want different things now. You're so focused on building your legacy, on being the good guy everyone respects. But I want more than that. I want excitement, passion, the freedom to take risks. And you don't think our marriage gives you that?" "Not anymore." Andrea's voice grew stronger, more confident. "I've realized that I've been living your dream instead of my own. The house, the charity events, the whole corporate wife routine. It's not who I am." Jack leaned back in his chair, studying his wife's face. "I see. So what do you propose we do about this incompatibility?" This was Andrea's moment. She reached into her purse and withdrew a small gift box, placing it on the table between them. "I have something to tell you first. Something that changes everything." Jack opened the box to find a pregnancy test. Positive. His expression remained carefully neutral, though inwardly he felt a complex mix of emotions. According to Kevin's timeline, Andrea had been with Travis during her fertile window. The baby, if she was actually pregnant, couldn't be his. "Congratulations," Andrea said, watching his face carefully. "You're going to be a father." "Am I?" The question hung in the air between them. Andrea's smile faltered for just an instant before recovering. "Of course you are. I know this is a surprise, but you don't think I'll be a good father," Jack interrupted gently. "You just said we want different things, that you need excitement and freedom. A baby with me would tie you to this life you've decided you don't want." Andrea shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't going according to script. Jack was supposed to be overjoyed, then devastated when she delivered the rest of her news. His calm analysis was throwing off her carefully rehearsed performance. "That's not what I meant," she said. "Having a baby changes things. It makes me realize that I need to be honest about what I want, what we both need." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "Honesty. Yes, I think we do need more of that in our relationship." Andrea reached into her purse again and withdrew an envelope. "I want a divorce, Jack. I've already filed the papers. I want the house, and, given the pregnancy, I think I'm entitled to substantial alimony. My lawyer says Travis's baby deserves financial security," Jack said quietly. The color drained from Andrea's face. For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked, then quickly tried to recover. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is your child, Jack. How can you even suggest?" "Because I've been having dinner with Kevin Steele for the past month." Jack reached beside his chair and withdrew his briefcase. "Kevin is a very thorough private investigator. Would you like to see his report?" Andrea's world tilted. Her carefully constructed plan was crumbling, but she wasn't ready to surrender. "You hired a private investigator? You spied on your own wife." "I verified suspicions that my wife had already aroused." Jack opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "This contains photographs of you and Travis at the Marriott Hotel, audio recordings of your conversations in our guest house, and documentation of how you've been sharing my business information with my competitor." He slid the folder across the table. Andrea's hands trembled slightly as she opened it to find a photo of her and Travis kissing outside the hotel. Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. "You bastard," she whispered. "How dare you spy on me?" "I dare because I'm not stupid, Andrea. I'm trusting, not blind." Jack's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "The question now is what we do with this information." Andrea's mind raced through possibilities. The photographs were damaging, but not necessarily legally devastating. Colorado was a no-fault divorce state. The business information sharing was concerning, but difficult to prove damages. She still had cards to play. Fine, she said, her voice hardening. So I had an affair. That doesn't change anything about the divorce or what I'm entitled to. Colorado law also allows for prenuptial agreements to be enforced, Jack interrupted. You might want to read page 12. Andrea flipped through the folder and found a copy of their prenup, the one she'd signed without reading carefully, trusting Jack's assurance that it was just a formality. Her lawyer had advised her to have it reviewed, but she'd been so eager to secure the marriage and the lifestyle it provided that she'd signed it immediately. The relevant clause was highlighted in yellow. In the event of adultery proven by clear and convincing evidence, the offending party forfeits all claims to marital property and alimony. You son of a bitch, Andrea breathed. You planned this from the beginning. No, Jack said sadly. I hoped I'd never need to use it. I put that clause in because my lawyer insisted, not because I expected you to betray me. I actually thought you were better than this. Andrea stared at the documents, her scheme crumbling around her. Without the house or alimony, she had nothing. Her savings were minimal, and Travis certainly wasn't going to support a pregnant girlfriend when he thought she was someone else's wife seeking a profitable divorce. What do you want? She asked finally. Jack studied his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, and felt something he hadn't expected: pity. Andrea had gambled everything on a plan that required Jack to be as naive as she thought he was. She'd underestimated not his intelligence, but his capacity to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. I want you out of my house by Sunday, he said quietly. Take your personal belongings and leave the rest. I'll file for divorce Monday morning, and, given this evidence, it should be finalized quickly. As for the baby, he paused, studying her face. Get a paternity test. If it's somehow mine, we'll work out custody arrangements. If not, that's between you and Travis. Andrea's composure finally cracked. You can't just throw me out with nothing. I have rights. You had rights, Jack corrected. You signed them away when you decided to betray your marriage. The only reason I'm giving you until Sunday is because I still remember the woman I thought I married. He stood up, leaving money on the table for dinner. Your lawyer will receive copies of everything tomorrow. I suggest you use the next few days to figure out your next move, because this game is over. As Jack walked away, Andrea sat frozen at the table, staring at the pregnancy test and the folder that had just destroyed her future. She'd been so certain that her intelligence and beauty would be enough to manipulate Jack into giving her everything she wanted. Instead, she discovered that the man she married was not the naive idealist she'd taken him for. Jack Porter was something much more dangerous, a patient, principled man who planned for every contingency and never forgot that actions had consequences. The first phase of Jack's counterattack was complete, but Andrea didn't yet realize that losing the divorce settlement was only the beginning of the price she would pay for her betrayal. Chapter 4. The investigation unfolds. 3 weeks earlier, Jack had sat in Kevin Steele's downtown office, feeling like a man betraying his own principles. The office was sparse and professional. Gray walls, metal desk, filing cabinets that probably contained the secrets of half of Denver's elite. Kevin himself was nothing like the stereotypical private investigator from movies. Mid-40s former police detective with the kind of quiet intensity that came from years of seeing people at their worst. I feel like I'm going crazy, Jack had admitted during that first meeting. Maybe I'm just paranoid. Kevin had listened without judgment as Jack detailed the changes in Andrea's behavior. The secretive phone calls, the new work friends, the sudden interest in improving her physical appearance, and the emotional distance that had grown between them like a canyon. Trust your instincts, Kevin had said. 90% of the people who come to me already know the truth. They just need confirmation. The investigation had started simple enough. Basic surveillance, tracking Andrea's movements and social interactions. But what Kevin uncovered went far beyond a typical affair. Andrea wasn't just cheating. She was systematically extracting information about Jack's business and feeding it to his primary competitor. Look at this, Kevin had said during their second meeting, spreading photographs across his desk. Your wife meets with Travis Jennings twice a week, always at the same hotel. But here's the interesting part. She brings files with her. Copies of documents, contracts, client lists. This isn't just an affair, Jack. It's corporate espionage. The audio recordings have been the most damaging evidence. Colorado's one-party consent law allowed Kevin to record conversations in public spaces, and Andrea's discussions with Travis have been remarkably candid about their plans to destroy Jack's business and take his assets. She's not just leaving you, Kevin had explained. She's planning to use everything she's learned about your business to compete against you. Jennings Development gets your client information, your bidding strategies, even your project timelines. Meanwhile, she gets half your money and the house to use as collateral for their new venture. Jack had felt physically sick learning the depth of Andrea's betrayal. This wasn't a crime of passion or a marriage that had simply grown cold. This was calculated, strategic deception spanning months of planning. There's more, Kevin had continued. Andrea has been meeting with a lawyer, Willard Orr. He specializes in high-asset divorces, particularly cases where the wife can claim the husband's earning potential should support her lifestyle indefinitely. Based on what I've observed, they're building a case that portrays you as a workaholic who neglected his wife's emotional needs, driving her to seek companionship elsewhere. The prenuptial agreement had been Jack's only protection, but even that had required careful handling. She'll have 3 months to contest the prenup, Kevin had warned. If she can prove it was signed under duress or that the adultery clause is unconscionable, a judge might overturn it. We need to be ready for a fight. But Jack's counterplan went beyond just protecting his assets. As he'd studied Kevin's reports, a different strategy had emerged, one that would ensure Andrea and Travis face consequences for their actions that went far beyond divorce court. Travis has been using insider information to bid on contracts, Jack had realized during their third meeting. That's bid tampering, possibly fraud. And Andrea, Jack had paused, seeing the bigger picture. She's technically my employee. She has access to proprietary information through our marriage, and she's selling it to a competitor. That's theft of trade secrets. Kevin had smiled grimly. Now you're thinking like someone who wants justice, not just protection. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. Jack would gather enough evidence to not only secure his divorce, but to file criminal charges against both Andrea and Travis. But first, he needed them to commit to their scheme publicly, creating a paper trail that couldn't be denied or explained away. Let them think they're winning, Jack had decided. Give them enough rope to hang themselves. Jack began feeding Andrea false information, fake client lists, bogus project timelines, and inflated financial projections. Through Kevin's surveillance, they could track exactly how this misinformation made its way to Travis and how he acted on it. Every transaction created evidence of their conspiracy. Meanwhile, Jack quietly secured his actual business assets. He moved key contracts to subsidiaries Andrea didn't know about, transferred valuable client relationships to Darren Wise's legal firm for safekeeping, and documented every piece of proprietary information Andrea had access to through their marriage. The beauty of this approach, Kevin had explained, is that they're creating the evidence of their own crimes. Every meeting, every document transfer, every bid Travis makes using your information, it's all building the case against them. Jack's decision to confront Andrea at Romano's had been carefully calculated. He wanted her to commit to the divorce publicly, to go on record with her demands for alimony and property. With Kevin recording the conversation from a nearby table, Andrea's own words would become evidence of her intent to defraud. She'll either fold completely or double down, Jack had predicted. Either way, we'll have everything we need. Now, walking back to his car after leaving Andrea at the restaurant, Jack felt the weight of what he'd set in motion. In 3 days, Andrea would be served with divorce papers that included not just his evidence of adultery, but criminal referrals to the district attorney's office. Travis would face similar charges related to business fraud and conspiracy. Jack's phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. Got everything. Audio is clear. Her admissions are on record. Phase 2 can begin. Phase 2 would determine not just who won the divorce, but who walked away with their freedom intact. Jack had spent his career building things, creating value, and believing in redemption. But Andrea and Travis had taught him that sometimes destruction was the only path to justice. The game they'd started was about to become something they hadn't anticipated, a reckoning that would cost them everything they'd schemed to steal from him. Chapter 5. The Web Titans. Travis Jennings paced his glass-walled office like a caged predator, his phone pressed to his ear as he listened to Andrea's frantic recounting of the dinner disaster. Outside, the Denver skyline stretched toward the mountains, but Travis saw none of it. His mind was calculating damage control and exit strategies. "You're telling me he knew everything?" Travis interrupted Andrea's rambling explanation. "The hotels, the guest house, all of it." "Everything," Andrea confirmed, her voice shaky. "He had photographs, recordings, financial records." "Travis, he's been planning this for weeks, maybe months." Travis cursed under his breath. He'd built Jennings' development by taking calculated risks, but this situation had spiraled beyond his control. The information Andrea had been feeding him about Porter Industries had given his company a significant competitive advantage over the past 6 months. 3 major contracts, worth nearly $15 million combined, had come his way because he'd known Jack's bidding strategies in advance. "What about the prenup?" Travis asked, though he already suspected the answer. "It's ironclad. The adultery clause voids everything. The house, alimony, all of it. My lawyer says we could contest it, but with Jack's evidence." Andrea's voice broke. "I'm going to lose everything." Travis's pragmatic nature kicked in. Andrea had been useful, but she was now a liability. The pregnancy complicated things, but not insurmountably. He'd dealt with inconvenient pregnancies before. His ex-wives could attest to that. "Listen carefully," Travis said, his voice taking on the cold tone that had intimidated business rivals for years. "You need to disappear for a while. I'll wire you $50,000, enough to get established somewhere else. Arizona, maybe California. Start fresh. 50,000. Andrea's voice rose. "Travis, I'm pregnant with your child. I gave up my marriage for you, shared everything I knew about Jack's business. And now that information is worthless because Jack knows about us." Travis cut her off. "Look, this was always a business arrangement that got personal. Now it's time to cut our losses." The silence on the line stretched for several seconds before Andrea spoke again, her voice different, harder. "I see. So this is how it ends? You get millions in contract for my information, and I get bus fare to Phoenix." "It's more than you'll get from Jack," Travis pointed out. "Take the money, Andrea. It's the best deal you're going to find." After ending the call, Travis sat back in his leather chair, mind racing through contingencies. He'd survived 2 messy divorces and several business scandals by staying one step ahead of trouble. The key was knowing when to advance and when to retreat. His assistant, Mona Mueller, knocked on his door. "Mr. Jennings? There's a Kevin Steele here to see you. Says it's about Porter Industries." Travis felt his stomach tighten. Kevin Steele was a name he recognized from law enforcement circles, a former detective turned private investigator with a reputation for thoroughness. If Jack had hired Steele, the situation was worse than Andrea had indicated. "Send him in," Travis said, forcing confidence into his voice. Kevin Steele entered with the unhurried pace of a man who held all the cards. Mid-40s, unremarkable appearance, but eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. He carried a briefcase that he placed carefully on Travis's desk before taking the offered seat. "Mr. Jennings, I work for Jack Porter. I think we need to have a conversation about your relationship with his wife." "I don't know what you're talking about," Travis replied automatically. Kevin opened his briefcase and withdrew a photograph, Travis and Andrea kissing outside the Marriott Hotel. "This was taken 2 weeks ago. We have similar photos dating back 3 months, plus audio recordings and financial transaction records. But that's not why I'm here." Travis said nothing, waiting. "I'm here because what you and Mrs. Porter have been doing constitutes several felonies under Colorado law," Kevin continued. "Theft of trade secrets, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud. The district attorney is very interested in cases involving corporate espionage, especially when it damages local businesses." "You can't prove." "The Morrison Project," Kevin interrupted. "Your company submitted a bid that was exactly 15% below Porter Industries' bid." "Interesting coincidence," given that Mrs. Porter had access to that bid information through her husband. Travis's mind raced. The Morrison project had been too good to pass up, a $4.2 million contract that he'd won by undercutting Jack's bid by precisely the margin Kevin mentioned. But how could they prove Andrea had shared that information? Kevin answered his unspoken question by withdrawing an audio recording device. This is from last Tuesday, recorded in the guest house behind the Porter residence. Would you like to hear Mrs. Porter explaining your strategy for the Morrison bid? Travis's composed facade cracked. What do you want? Justice, Kevin said simply. But Mr. Porter is a reasonable man. He's prepared to offer you a choice. Kevin slid a document across the desk. Option 1. You return all proprietary information you've obtained about Porter Industries, forfeit the 3 contracts you won using that information, and pay damages of $2 million. In exchange, Mr. Porter won't file criminal charges. Travis scanned the document, his face growing paler with each line. This would bankrupt my company. Option 2, Kevin continued, involves the FBI, the district attorney, and probable federal charges for mail and wire fraud. Your choice. I need time to consider. You have until Friday, Kevin said, standing. That's 3 days. After that, Mr. Porter files charges, and this becomes a criminal matter rather than a civil one. After Kevin left, Travis slumped in his chair, seeing his empire crumbling around him. The contracts Kevin mentioned represented nearly 60% of his company's current revenue. Without them, Jennings Development would fold within months. But Travis hadn't built his company by accepting defeat. If Jack Porter wanted to play hardball, Travis would show him what real ruthlessness looked like. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Glenn Rivera? It's Travis Jennings. I need a favor, the kind we used to do in the old days. Glenn Rivera had been Travis's partner before going legitimate, back when their construction company had operated in the gray areas of Denver's building boom. Rivera now ran what appeared to be a legitimate security consulting firm, but Travis knew about his other services, the ones that didn't appear on business cards. I need someone to have an accident, Travis said quietly. Jack Porter. Make it look random, but make sure it's permanent. There's $500,000 in it if it's done right. Rivera's voice was cautious. That's serious money for serious risk. You sure about this? Travis looked out at the Denver skyline, seeing everything he'd built slipping away. I'm sure. This needs to happen before Friday. What Travis didn't know was that Kevin Steele had anticipated exactly this type of response. Jack's office and home were under discreet surveillance, and Glenn Rivera had been on law enforcement's radar for years. The phone call Travis thought was his salvation would become the final piece of evidence in his own destruction. Jack had learned that sometimes the best way to catch predators was to make them feel cornered. Desperate animals made mistakes, and Travis Jennings was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Chapter 6. The Hunter Becomes Hunted. Jack sat in his study at home, surrounded by the familiar comfort of law books, business journals, and family photos that now seemed like artifacts from another life. The house felt different without Andrea's presence. Not empty, but cleaner somehow, as if a source of tension had been removed. She'd taken her belongings as instructed, leaving behind only the expensive jewelry he'd given her over the years and a note of apology that read more like a business memo than a wife's farewell. Kevin Steele's latest report lay open on the desk. 27 pages documenting not just Andrea and Travis's affair, but a pattern of corporate espionage that stretched back 8 months. What had started as marital infidelity had evolved into something far more dangerous. A calculated campaign to destroy everything Jack had built. The phone rang, interrupting his review of the evidence. The caller ID showed Darren Wise's number. Jack, we need to talk. Darren's voice was tense. Can you meet me at the office? Now. 30 minutes later, Jack sat in Darren's law office, studying his friend's grim expression. Darren had been the one constant in Jack's life since college. The cynical attorney who balanced Jack's optimistic worldview with hard pragmatism. Tonight, that cynicism looked like genuine fear. Kevin called me an hour ago, Darren began. Travis made a phone call this afternoon that changes everything. He's not taking the deal, Jack. He's escalating. Jack felt his blood chill. Escalating how? Darren slid a transcript across the desk. He called Glenn Rivera. They have history from before Travis went legitimate. Rivera runs a security consulting firm that provides additional services for clients who need problems to disappear. Jack read the transcript, his face growing pale. The conversation was brief but unambiguous. Travis had arranged for Jack to have an accident before Friday's deadline. The price tag was $500,000. How did Kevin get this? Jack asked. Travis's phone has been monitored since Tuesday. Kevin got a warrant based on the fraud evidence. The FBI is already tracking Rivera's movements. Darren leaned forward. Jack, you need to understand what this means. You're not just dealing with adultery and business fraud anymore. This is attempted murder. Jack set down the transcript, his mind processing this new reality. He'd known Travis was ruthless in business, but ordering a hit crossed every line Jack had thought existed between civilized competition and criminal violence. What are my options? Jack asked. Legally, we have enough evidence to put both Travis and Rivera away for decades. The FBI wants to arrest them both immediately. Darren paused. But there's a complication, which is Rivera has connections, former military, mercenary work, the kind of people who don't give up just because their boss gets arrested. If Travis goes down, he might decide to take you with him, out of spite, revenge, or just to tie up loose ends. Jack walked to Darren's window, looking out at the city lights. In 48 hours, his life had transformed from a failing marriage to a matter of life and death. The man who'd built his reputation on trust and ethical business practices now faced enemies who operated by completely different rules. There's another option, Darren said quietly. Kevin has a proposal. Jack turned back to his friend. I'm listening. We let Travis think his plan is working. Kevin has contacts from his police days. People who can stage your accident convincingly enough to fool Travis, at least temporarily. Meanwhile, the FBI closes in on Rivera and his associates. You're talking about faking my death? Temporarily, yes. Long enough to get Travis and Rivera into custody and neutralize any backup plans they might have. Kevin says it's the only way to guarantee your safety and gather enough evidence to make federal charges stick. Jack considered the proposal. It was risky, complicated, and required trusting his life to people he'd known for less than a month. But the alternative, spending the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wasn't acceptable either. What about Andrea? Darren's expression hardened. Andrea made her choice when she fed information to Travis. She's facing accessory charges for the murder conspiracy, whether she knew about it or not. Her information enabled Travis's plan. She might not have known. Jack, stop. Darren's voice was sharp. Andrea isn't the woman you married, or she never was that woman to begin with. Either way, she's complicit in a plan to murder you. Your loyalty to her ends here. The weight of Darren's words settled over Jack like a heavy blanket. The last vestiges of his marriage, the final threads of trust and hope, were being severed by the reality of what Andrea had become. If we do this, how long would I have to stay dead? Kevin estimates 2 weeks, maybe 3. Long enough to document Travis and Rivera's reactions, gather additional evidence, and make sure there are no other threats out there. Darren pulled out another document. This is a witness protection protocol. The FBI has safe houses, new identities, the whole package. You'd have round-the-clock security. Jack read through the document, seeing his life reduced to procedural steps and security protocols. It wasn't the future he'd envisioned, but it was better than no future at all. When would this happen? Tomorrow night. Kevin's people would stage a car accident on the Canyon Road. Remote location. Car goes over the embankment. Body never recovered due to the river. Very believable, very final. Jack made his decision with the same methodical approach he used for business contracts. Do it, but I want guarantees that Andrea won't be hurt, regardless of her involvement. And I want Travis and Rivera to face full prosecution. No plea deals, no reduced sentences. Darren nodded. Already arranged. Kevin's been working with the FBI and DA's office. This case is going to make careers. As Jack prepared to leave, Darren grabbed his arm. Jack, once you're officially dead, There's no communication with the outside world until this is over. No contact with business partners, friends, family, no one. You'll be completely isolated. I understand. Do you? Because the man who comes back from this won't be the same person who disappears tomorrow night. You're about to see exactly how far people will go when they think you can't fight back. It changes you. Jack looked at his oldest friend, seeing something in Darren's eyes that suggested he spoke from experience. Maybe it's time I changed. The old Jack Porter was too trusting, too willing to see the best in people. Maybe the new one needs to be harder. Just don't lose yourself completely, Darren warned. The world needs people like you, principled, ethical, willing to do the right thing even when it costs them. Don't let Travis and Andrea take that away from you. As Jack drove home through the Denver streets, he reflected on how quickly his world had transformed. In less than a week, he'd gone from a successful businessman with a failing marriage to a target for assassination. Tomorrow night, Jack Porter would die in a car accident, and someone else, someone harder, smarter, and far less trusting, would take his place. The game Andrea and Travis had started was entering its final phase, but they had no idea that the rules had changed completely. They thought they were playing against the same naive optimist they'd been manipulating for months. Instead, they were about to discover what happened when a good man decided that being good wasn't enough anymore. Chapter 7. The Reckoning begins. The staging of Jack's death was flawless in its execution. At 11:47 p.m. on a moonless Thursday night, a 2019 Ford F-150 registered to Jack Porter careened through the guardrail on Canyon Creek Road, plummeting 200 feet into the rushing waters below. The explosion that followed could be seen for miles, and by dawn, search and rescue teams were combing the riverbanks for a body that would never be found. From his position in an FBI safe house 30 miles away, Jack watched the local news coverage with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. The reporter spoke solemnly about the tragic loss of a pillar of the business community, while aerial footage showed the twisted remains of his truck being pulled from a creek. "It's working," Kevin Steele reported, monitoring communications from the FBI surveillance van. "Travis just called Rivera to confirm the job was done. He's wiring the money to an offshore account as we speak." Jack studied the surveillance photos Kevin had spread across the table. Travis's reaction to news of Jack's death had been captured in high-definition detail. Relief, satisfaction, and what appeared to be genuine excitement as he celebrated at his downtown office with a bottle of champagne. "He's not even trying to hide it," Jack observed. "Sociopaths rarely do," FBI agent Morgan Waller replied. Agent Waller was the lead investigator on the case, a serious woman in her 40s who'd built her career prosecuting white-collar crime. "Travis thinks he's won. He'll be sloppy now, overconfident. That's when they make mistakes." Andrea's reaction had been more complex. Surveillance footage showed her collapsing when she'd heard the news, genuine grief mixing with what appeared to be shock. But within hours, she was meeting with her lawyer, presumably to discuss how Jack's death affected her legal situation. "She's claiming she knew nothing about the murder plot," Agent Waller continued. "Says Travis acted alone, that she only provided business information and never intended for anyone to be hurt." "Do you believe her?" Jack asked. "Doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is what we can prove. And right now, we can prove she was a willing participant in corporate espionage and fraud. The murder conspiracy, that's harder to pin on her directly." Jack found himself surprisingly indifferent to Andrea's potential fate. The woman he'd loved had ceased to exist the moment she betrayed their marriage. This person, the one calculating how to profit from his death, was a stranger wearing his wife's face. "What's the timeline for arrests?" Jack asked. Kevin checked his watch. "Rivera first. We're waiting for him to collect payment from Travis. That gives us financial transaction records linking them directly. Then Travis, probably within the next 48 hours. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. By allowing Travis and Rivera to complete their transaction, the FBI would have indisputable evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. Combined with the corporate espionage charges, Travis faced a minimum of 25 years in federal prison. "There's something else," Agent Waller said, her expression grim. "We've been monitoring Rivera's communications. He's not working alone. There's a whole network involved in this. Taking down Travis might be just the beginning. Jack felt a chill of recognition. You think this goes deeper than just my situation? Rivera's operation has been active for years. Corporate executives who need problems eliminated, business rivals who meet with unfortunate accidents, whistleblowers who disappear before they can testify. Travis might have just led us to something much bigger. The safe house phone rang, interrupting their discussion. Agent Waller answered, her expression growing increasingly serious as she listened. That was surveillance, she reported after hanging up. Travis just left his office with luggage. He's heading for the airport. Kevin was already reaching for his equipment. He's running. But why? The plan worked. Jack's dead. The threat is eliminated. Why would he flee now? Agent Waller was coordinating with other FBI units through a radio. Maybe he's not as stupid as we thought. Or maybe Rivera told him something that spooked him. Jack felt a surge of frustration. After days of careful planning, Travis was about to escape the trap they'd set for him. Can you stop him at the airport? Not without blowing your cover, Agent Waller replied. If we arrest him now, without the completed transaction with Rivera, his lawyers will claim he was fleeing grief over his lover's husband's death, not consciousness of guilt. So we let him go? We track him, Kevin corrected. Travis thinks he's free, but every move he makes is being monitored. Sometimes the best way to catch a fish is to let it swim around with the hook in its mouth for a while. Over the next 6 hours, they tracked Travis's movements through Denver International Airport, onto a plane bound for Miami, and finally to a hotel in the Cayman Islands. With each mile he traveled, Travis was adding to the evidence against him. Flight from prosecution, attempting to access offshore accounts that would prove money laundering, and eventually, they hoped, contact with Rivera or other co-conspirators. He's making this easy for us, Agent Waller observed as they monitored Travis's hotel registration. Running to a non-extradition country with a bag full of cash isn't exactly subtle. But Jack was thinking about the bigger picture. Travis's flight meant the immediate threat was eliminated, but it also meant he was free to continue his criminal activities from outside U.S. jurisdiction. More importantly, it meant Andrea would likely never face serious consequences for her role in the conspiracy. I want to talk to her, Jack announced suddenly. Agent Waller shook her head. Absolutely not. Your safety depends on maintaining the fiction that you're dead. Contact with anyone from your old life compromises everything. Not contact, observation. I want to see how she reacts when she thinks she's alone, when there's no performance for lawyers or investigators. Kevin considered the request. It's risky, but it might provide insight into how much she really knew about Travis's plans. If she's genuinely innocent of the murder conspiracy, it could affect how the DA handles her case. After much debate, they agreed to a limited surveillance operation. Using high-powered listening devices and cameras, they would monitor Andrea's behavior from a safe distance, allowing Jack to observe his wife's genuine reactions without compromising his safety. What they discovered would shake Jack's understanding of everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd married. Chapter 8. Revelations and Consequences. The surveillance van was parked 3 blocks from Jack's former home. Its array of sophisticated listening devices aimed at the house where Andrea now lived alone. Through high-resolution cameras and parabolic microphones, Jack could observe his wife's private moments with startling clarity. What he saw challenged every assumption he'd made about Andrea's level of involvement in the conspiracy against him. On Saturday morning, 2 days after Jack's supposed death, Andrea sat in their former bedroom, surrounded by photo albums and mementos from their marriage. But she wasn't grieving. She was methodically sorting through evidence of their life together, separating items into different boxes with the efficiency of someone conducting an inventory. She's looking for something, Agent Waller observed, adjusting the camera angle to get a better view. Through the listening devices, they could hear Andrea on the phone with someone, not her lawyer, but a voice they didn't recognize. The life insurance policy is worth $2 million, Andrea was saying, her voice cold and businesslike. But there's a 2-year suicide clause, and it hasn't been 2 years yet since Jack increased the coverage. We need to make sure the accident investigation concludes it was accidental death, not suicide. Jack felt his blood freeze. Not only had Andrea known about Travis's plan, She'd been actively planning to profit from it. The voice on the other end of the phone was tinny but audible. What about the business? Porter Industries must be worth 10 times that. Jack was smart about the corporate structure, Andrea replied. Most of his assets are in trusts or tied to business partnerships. But I found something better. She opened a file cabinet and withdrew documents that made Jack's heart sink. They were copies of contracts he'd thought were secure, agreements with 3 major clients worth over $20 million combined. These contracts have personal guarantee clauses, Andrea continued. If Porter Industries can't fulfill them due to Jack's death, the clients can claim damages from his estate. But if someone were to take over the contracts and complete the work, the person on the phone laughed, a sound that made Jack's skin crawl. You've been planning this longer than Travis knew. Travis thought he was the mastermind, Andrea said with contempt. But he was just the muscle. The real plan was always about positioning myself to inherit Jack's business relationships and client base. His death was just the catalyst. Agent Waller was recording everything, but Jack barely noticed. He was watching his wife, his supposedly grief-stricken widow, calmly discussing how to profit from his murder with someone who seemed to know far more about the situation than any innocent party should. Who was she talking to? Jack asked Kevin. Kevin was running the voice through FBI databases, comparing it to known associates of both Andrea and Travis. After several minutes, he had an answer that made the situation even worse. Warren Rios, Kevin reported. He's Andrea's ex-boyfriend from before your marriage. More importantly, he's Glenn Rivera's cousin and a person of interest in 3 other corporate murders over the past 5 years. The pieces of a much larger puzzle were clicking into place. Andrea hadn't just stumbled into an affair with Travis. She'd been cultivating relationships with people connected to corporate assassination for years, possibly since before her marriage to Jack. This was always the plan, Jack realized with growing horror. She married me to get access to my business, spent years learning about my clients and contracts, then orchestrated my death to steal everything I'd built. Agent Waller was coordinating with other FBI units through a radio. We need to expand this investigation. If Andrea and Warren Rios have been working together for years, there might be other victims. The surveillance continued through the afternoon, revealing more layers of Andrea's deception. She met with Rios in person at the house, and their conversation revealed a criminal enterprise that stretched far beyond Jack's situation. The Denver market is getting too hot, Rios was saying. Too much attention from law enforcement. We should consider moving operations to Phoenix or Dallas. Not yet, Andrea replied. I still need to secure Jack's client list and finish the Porter Industries takeover. Give me 6 months to consolidate everything. Then we can expand to other markets. They discussed other projects, corporate executives who died in convenient accidents, widows who'd inherited valuable businesses, and a network of lawyers, investigators, and assassins who specialized in making murder look like misfortune. Jack listened with a mixture of rage and admiration for the scope of Andrea's deception. She'd played the role of loving wife so convincingly that he'd never suspected she was essentially a serial killer who specialized in marriage-based cons. How many others? Jack asked Agent Waller. We're investigating at least 6 similar cases over the past 3 years, she replied grimly. Rich men who died in accidents shortly after their wives had learned enough about their businesses to take control. The pattern is consistent. The wives all had connections to Warren Rios, and they all profited significantly from their husbands' deaths. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. Andrea wasn't just an unfaithful wife who'd gotten involved with dangerous people. She was a professional predator who targeted Jack specifically because of his wealth, his trusting nature, and his valuable business relationships. As evening approached, Andrea made a phone call that confirmed Jack's darkest suspicions about her true nature. Travis is in the Caymans, she reported to someone. He's panicking, thinks the FBI might be watching him. Should we eliminate him as a liability? The casual way she discussed murdering her former lover, the father of the child she claimed to be carrying, revealed the true depth of her sociopathy. Not yet, came the reply. Let him stay paranoid for a while. If he becomes a real threat, we can arrange an accident. Island vacations can be dangerous. Diving accidents, boat explosions, food poisoning. Lots of options. Jack had heard enough. The woman he'd loved, the person he'd trusted with his life and his dreams, was a monster who'd spent years planning his death with the same casual efficiency most people use to plan dinner parties. But he'd also heard something else. Andrea and her network were making mistakes, getting overconfident, revealing details about their other crimes. The FBI now had enough evidence to dismantle an entire criminal organization that had been operating undetected for years. What happens now? Jack asked. Agent Waller was already coordinating with federal prosecutors. Now we arrest everyone. Andrea, Warren Rios, Glenn Rivera, and at least a dozen other people connected to this network. This is going to be one of the biggest organized crime takedowns in Colorado history. Jack stared at the surveillance monitors, watching Andrea pour herself a glass of wine from the bottle he'd bought to celebrate their 3rd anniversary. She was toasting her success in murdering him, completely unaware that her victim was watching every move she made. The game that had started with a simple divorce was ending with the destruction of a criminal empire. But for Jack, the victory fell hollow. He'd won, but the cost was the complete annihilation of everything he believed about the woman he'd married and the life they'd shared. Tomorrow, Andrea would learn that her husband was very much alive and that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse around her. The reckoning she'd been planning for others was about to become her own. Chapter 9. Justice Served. The arrests began at dawn on Monday morning, coordinated across 6 states by federal agents who'd spent the weekend preparing for the largest organized crime takedown in Denver's history. Jack watched from the FBI command center as live feeds showed simultaneous raids on locations from Colorado to Florida. Andrea was the first to be taken into custody. The surveillance cameras captured her shock as FBI agents surrounded the house at 6 a.m., her confusion turning to terror as Agent Waller read the charges: conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, money laundering, and racketeering under the RICO Act. She actually asked if this was about her affair with Travis. Agent Waller reported with grim amusement. Even at the moment of arrest, she was still trying to play the role of the guilty wife instead of the criminal mastermind. Warren Rios was arrested simultaneously at his Phoenix safe house, along with computers containing records of dozens of accidents dating back 7 years. Glenn Rivera's capture in Miami required a SWAT team. He'd barricaded himself in a hotel room with enough weapons to outfit a small army. But the biggest surprise came from Travis's arrest in the Cayman Islands. When local authorities raided his hotel room, they found him in a state of complete psychological collapse, paranoid, delusional, convinced that Jack's ghost was haunting him. He kept insisting that Jack was still alive, reported the FBI liaison in Georgetown, said he could see him in mirrors, hear his voice on the phone. The stress of running combined with guilt over the murder has caused a complete mental breakdown. Jack felt no satisfaction watching Travis's psychological destruction. If anything, seeing his former competitor reduced to a babbling wreck highlighted the difference between justice and revenge. Jack had wanted consequences for Travis's actions, not his complete psychological annihilation. The evidence gathered from the arrests painted a picture of criminal enterprise that stretched far beyond what anyone had initially suspected. Andrea and Warren Rios had been operating their marriage murder scheme for over a decade, targeting wealthy businessmen across the western United States. Jack was intended to be victim number 12. The pattern was always the same, FBI analyst Lisa Brock explained during the case briefing. Andrea would target successful, trusting men through professional or social connections. She'd cultivate a relationship, marry them, spend several years learning about their businesses and finances, then coordinate their deaths to look like accidents. The scheme was sophisticated in its simplicity. Andrea's background in marketing made her excellent at reading people and presenting herself as whatever they wanted in a partner. Her accomplices provided the technical expertise for both the murders and the subsequent business takeovers. What about the pregnancy? Jack asked, though he dreaded the answer. Fake, Agent Waller replied without emotion. The pregnancy test was doctored, probably to add emotional manipulation to her divorce strategy. There was never any baby. Jack absorbed this final betrayal with surprising calm. Every aspect of his relationship with Andrea had been calculated deception, from their first meeting at a Chamber of Commerce event to her final performance at Romano's restaurant. Nothing had been real, not her love, her desires for the future, or her claims about starting a family. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case, Rita Cameron, laid out the charges against each defendant. Andrea faced life in prison without parole under federal RICO statutes. Warren Rios and Glenn Rivera faced similar sentences, while Travis's mental state would be evaluated to determine his competency to stand trial. The victims' families from the previous murders will finally have justice, Prosecutor Cameron explained. Some of these cases were ruled accidental deaths, but now we can reopen them as homicides. Jack thought about those other victims, men like himself who'd trusted the wrong person, who believed in love while their wives plotted their deaths. At least their families would finally know the truth. What happens to Porter Industries? Jack asked. Kevin Steele had been working on that problem for days. Your death was staged convincingly enough that you'll need to be officially resurrected through the courts. It's complicated, but your business assets were protected by the corporate structure you'd established. Everything can be restored. But Jack found himself strangely uninterested in returning to his old life. The man who'd built Porter Industries had been naive, trusting, and fundamentally unprepared for the level of evil he'd encountered. That person couldn't simply resume his previous existence. I want to sell the company, Jack announced. Use the proceeds to establish a foundation that helps investigate suspicious deaths of business executives. Something that might prevent other families from going through what those previous victims' families experienced. Darren Wise had been quiet throughout the briefings, but now he spoke up. Jack, you don't have to make any permanent decisions right now. You've been through trauma that most people couldn't imagine surviving. Take time to process this before you dismantle your life's work. My life's work was built on a foundation of trust that no longer exists, Jack replied. I can't go back to being the person who believed people were fundamentally good. That man is dead. We made sure of that with our staged accident. Agent Waller looked concerned. Jack, don't let these people change who you are. The world needs people like you. People who build things, who trust others, who try to make positive contributions. Jack considered her words carefully. She was right that the world needed builders and idealists. But it also needed people who understood that evil existed and were prepared to fight it effectively. I'm not becoming like them, Jack said finally. But I'm not going back to being naive either. There's a middle ground, being good while understanding that not everyone else is. 3 months later, Jack testified at Andrea's trial. She sat at the defendant's table looking nothing like the polished woman he'd married. Prison had stripped away her veneer of sophistication, revealing something hollow and predatory underneath. When their eyes met across the courtroom, Jack felt no anger, no lingering love, no desire for revenge. She was simply a problem that had been solved, a threat that had been neutralized. The woman he'd loved had never existed. She'd been a performance, a mask worn by a predator. Andrea was sentenced to life without parole. Warren Rios and Glenn Rivera received similar sentences. Travis, judged competent to stand trial despite his mental breakdown, was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. Jack kept his word about the business. Porter Industries was sold to his employees through a management buyout, with the proceeds establishing the Porter Foundation for Corporate Crime Investigation. The foundation would fund private investigators, support victims' families, and work with law enforcement to identify patterns in suspicious business-related deaths. 6 months after his resurrection, Jack stood in the offices of his new organization, looking out at the Denver skyline. He was no longer the trusting optimist who'd built Porter Industries, but he wasn't the cynical victim Andrea had tried to create either. He was something new, a man who understood both the capacity for evil and the necessity of fighting it. The game Andrea and Travis had started with their betrayal had ended with Jack's complete victory. But more importantly, it had ended with the creation of something that would protect others from the same fate. Justice, Jack had learned, wasn't just about punishment. It was about prevention. And in that mission, The man who'd survived his own murder would spend the rest of his life ensuring that other good people wouldn't become victims of predators like Andrea Caldwell Porter. The last checkmate had been played, and Jack Porter, both the man who'd died and the one who'd been reborn, had won.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.